Many times you find yourself pretending to be someone you're not just to avoid feeling out of place in conversations. Isn't that right? This can be the impact of ADHD, referred to as the inauthentic self. Learn to identify and change this game with the method I created and use every day. Check it out in the first link in the description. Let's find out if what you have is actually ADHD or something else. Since you probably came to this video because of that, there are some signs that indicate this. In this video, I'm going to give you some important signs that can indeed define a person with ADHD. Remember that everything I say in this video, on this channel, or even what you find out there on the internet doesn't count as a real test. Let's go. You can get an idea, you can clarify some doubts, but you should click on this video that appears here in the card so you really know what you need to do to get the correct diagnosis. Alright, so let's go. The first is an important trait that for sure people with ADHD face in their daily lives, which is chronic procrastination. We know that everyone procrastinates, right? It's really hard to tell the difference between regular procrastination and chronic procrastination. But if we could infer, it's kind of like this. Take that normal curve, the Gaussian curve, and you see that most people have some level of procrastination. That's part of being human. It happens that when you have ADHD, you experience this chronically. And it's recurring, meaning every single day, you have to do things that even if they only take, 5 minutes to do, sometimes you take 5 hours to even start doing them. And this happens all the time. This causes a lot of setbacks in your life. Whether it's academic setbacks, in relationships, professional ones, everything. You end up leaving everything until the very last minute, and this will lead to a lot of consequences for you. In this case, we're talking about people who are really very anxious. A part of this anxiety comes from precisely not being able to do anything or not being able to start anything, putting off everything that isn't enjoyable for as long as possible. Item 2 is that you should show some kind of degree of learning difficulty. But you see, I'm not talking about the person's intelligence like. In other words, it simply wouldn't be a learning disorder either. It's not that you have a greater difficulty learning to read or write or something very specific. But learning in general, whether it's in school or outside of it, at certain points, you might have this difficulty. Usually, this is related to obligations that aren't interesting to us. For example, when I worked at Banco do Brasil, I left a certain area there and went into technology. I had to learn a bunch of new concepts with a lot of commands, and because of my difficulties, I was taking a long time to learn all of that. I had to write down every comma, every step the teacher took, sometimes even interrupting the flow of the teacher's lessons, because I had to actually write down each one. Step. And not that I'm not smart, what I realize is that teachers had to teach 2 to 3 times at most PRO's students, but for me, it really had to be twice that. It's like I have to work 2 or 3 times harder just to keep up with the class. As we know, our working memory or operational memory, which is one of our executive functions, it affects those with ADHD more. In other words, when you're faced with a new activity that isn't interesting, that isn't leisure, that isn't a hobby, you're going to face a much greater difficulty in memorizing those new commands and steps. And then you really struggle to learn, to memorize, and this process becomes almost torture for you. The third item is that you usually get lost in group conversations. And sometimes you even get lost talking one-on-one. You've been talking to the person for 20 minutes and you don't remember anything they said. If she asks you a question like, "So, what did you think about that?" "What did I say?" And you look at the person dying of embarrassment to ask them to repeat themselves. Everything she said, but in general, in a one-on-one, you do well. But when 3 or 4 people get together, they're talking among themselves. And you're paying attention to one person, and the other one is already talking, the other one is laughing and responding. It's like such a huge mental fatigue for you to stay focused there and not drift off. Because one of the people has beans in their teeth, and the other person is wearing something weird, and you don't remember anything else from the conversation. Anyway, there's all that confusion, and then what happens? Your brain, he quickly escapes that exhausting situation, and you run to something that's more relaxing. Like, for example, just scrolling on your phone. In other words, people with ADHD, when they're in group situations, either monopolize the conversation for themselves or they end up fiddling with their phones and completely disconnecting. It's more comfortable for you to stay in your own little world than to interact with people, which ends up generating social consequences. You're not remembered for the upcoming events. You're not remembered to be called. Or then, when you go, people think you're snobby, that you don't talk to everyone anyway, and we know that's not true. Right. It's just a difficulty we have, really. A fourth characteristic is that we tend to be dreamers who execute very little. You have ideas, but they're shelved. Dopamine, a key neurotransmitter, drives engagement and action. In short, dopamine prompts you to get up and drink water. The important neurotransmitter that fuels our mind, dopamine, is responsible for your engagement and ability to take action. You feel thirsty, and dopamine will make you go to the kitchen to drink water. In other words, you feel thirsty, but it's dopamine in a minimal amount that will make you get off your butt and go to the kitchen to drink water. without needing to be in an extreme situation like, I don't know, going a day without drinking water, dying of thirst, then you'll go anyway. But you need to have your mind properly fueled with neurotransmitters so that you can take the actions of what you plan. Otherwise, you'll just stay in the planning stage so that you can take the actions on what you plan. On the contrary, you'll just stay in the planning stage. Another thing I can mention that everyone with ADHD has is very intense impulsivity. Impulsivity in acting and speaking. Before you know it, you've made an unexpected purchase. You made a hasty decision, got involved in a pyramid scheme, entered a relationship with someone you barely knew, but I don't know, you were just looking to date. Or even at a completely inappropriate event, you crack a joke, I don't know, suddenly, at a funeral, you just go for it. Who's going to tell a joke at a funeral? You, who have ADHD and this fact that you keep messing up out there. This ends up hurting your image with others, and also mainly your self-image. You really start to feel like the odd one out because, man, everything I say, I'm messing up, so it's better to just stay quiet here by myself. And you even start to disconnect a bit from your authenticity. And this can lead you to create your inauthentic persona, which is something that many times we don't even realize we're doing, but we are, and this is hurting us a lot. I talk a lot about the inauthentic persona in the ADHD Club in action. How will you notice if you're acting this way? And how can you get rid of this persona? Click here on the card or on the first link in the description. But dealing with your impulses, it's a bit more difficult. Yes, for people who have ADHD, but not everything is lost. In general, by doing some self-assessment, learning tools, figuring out how to cope, seeking help, and properly following treatment, it's one of the sure ways for you to overcome the difficulties that ADHD naturally brings. So these traits, these examples I gave, are related to what you might be suspecting. Do you really think you have ADHD? Anyway, leave a comment below to tell us what you thought of this video, if you identified with it. It stayed, if it has nothing to do with it. And that's it. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, see you later, and bye. ADHD, stop blaming others. Unfortunately, your parents, teachers, colleagues, they may have been hard on you, but you need to stop blaming them to develop your self-responsibility and finally take off in life. I also went through all of this and suffered into adulthood, but I developed a method to put an end to it. You can access this method in the first link in the description.